continue. All right, everyone. Hey, good to see y'all. More folks should be joining in right now. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box. So every Friday, we've been having discussions around land, issues around land, which can be many, either homelessness, the land itself, the stories of the land, gardening, everything. So we've been having many speakers come here. It's been great conversations. Just been really fun. We have a YouTube channel now, so if any folks are going to be watching this on YouTube, feel free to comment, ask us any questions and any other topics you'd like us to dive more into. But yeah, these discussions have been about like how we can become more better stewards of the land. Some of them are about leaning from ownership to more stewardship. But other than that, this conversation, I think for a lot of us might speak to our youth. For me, if I share a little story, when I was in 6th grade, I had a kid in class ask the teacher, why did the Native Americans get their land stolen? And the teacher just said, because they weren't civilized. So that's probably all the K through 12 education I ever had about Native American, quote unquote. And so, having educators like yourselves come here and really have this dialogue, I think it's gonna, it not only heals me and my inner child, but is gonna help a lot of the next generations. And hopefully, there'll be a lot more healing. So with that said, I'm gonna turn it over to Teresa, and it's for her to share some words.
Hi, thank you everyone for being here. I just want to introduce Athena Calderon. She's our Tongva Elder, and she'll be saying a few words to open this gathering. We're really blessed to have her here, and it's everything to have the Tongva people in this conversation about education. And like Joe was saying, his experience and my experience was I was made to do the 4th grade mission project, and I really had no clue what I was doing, but I just knew I had to build this mission and make it beautiful, and I really didn't understand what I was doing. So I really appreciate this work that's going into telling the truth now. Thank you, Tina, for being here.
Hello, relatives. My name is Tina Athena Calderon. I'm Gabrielino Tongva and Ventureño Chumash. I'm so happy to be here with all of you today. And I want to thank the panel for inviting me to open up in a good way. I just wanted to acknowledge all of you, because those of you who have chosen to be educators as your profession, you've taken on a really huge responsibility. And it isn't always easy, I know this, but the reward in seeing our youth excel, it must make you extremely proud. And for those of you that are focusing on decolonizing education, wow, you're taking on an immensely important task. So I want to thank you wholeheartedly, personally, I want to thank you. And as an incentive to get us all to thinking about how it was, just a short, about 300 years ago or so, how was it here before colonization? So I want to share with you a poem that I wrote, and it's called Imagine a World. Imagine a world where the water is pristine and all that dwells there is thriving. Imagine a world where the air is so clean that you can see the mountains and the islands across the ocean. Imagine a world where every person in your community is valued, where skills are taught, food is shared, everyone has enough, so there's no need for greed. And we have councils of elders to solve disputes. Imagine a world where there is no need for prisons because all of us are being honest, giving, and kind, and we're all doing our part and living in honor. Imagine a world where respect and honor and reciprocity is a natural way of being. Is that just my dream, or can you all imagine this world? So to me, that's what decolonization is. And I know that we'll never be able to go back 100%. I know that we have to drive cars until we find some other kind of safer mode for the environment. I know that we've been colonized and this is really hard to shake a lot of it. But once we start resolving to go back to living in communities that support one another, where we start growing our food and sharing it with one another, where we start listening to our elders again and letting them help rear the children while our adults are working and doing what they have to do, that's when we're going to go back to decolonization. And so I just encourage everyone listening to go ahead and do your best. Do your best, because right now it's really scary, like the new cancel culture and all this stuff that's out there. We're discounting valid people. People make mistakes. People are not perfect, but there's ways that we can counsel them. There's ways that we can reform them. And there's ways that when somebody is harmed, we can give them the power to decide how things need to be rectified. So I really encourage us to be better stewards to the land and also to be better to one another. Let's respect one another. So again, thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to hearing what all of you have to say. Thank you, thank you. Aweshwanaha.
Well, thank you so much, Tina. That poem made me teary-eyed, made me cry. It was so moving, so beautiful, the words that you shared with us. And I hope and pray that we can have this, work towards this world and keep doing what we can every day in our own lives to make it so that everybody matters, like you said in your poem. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I'm gonna take off my video and listen in.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, now I'd like to invite Romo and Reyes to speak on the work that they're doing on decolonizing education.
Thank you for having us here. Thank you for inviting us. And Tina, thank you so much for the prayer, the intro, the poem. I think I can speak for Arturo in asking if that would be okay to work into our curriculum and share that poem in our classes.
Yes, absolutely. I was gonna type it in, but of course you can.
Thank you so much.
Tina. I'd love to share that with my students.
Yes, so thank you, Tina. Thank you, Teresa and Joe, for having us and for creating a place and a space where we can talk about these really important and liberatory issues. I think that part of what me and Reyes have been thinking about as educators are the things that go unsaid in education, and how naming those things allow us to dream of better worlds, and remembering things that we're forced to forget or that we're coerced into forgetting, that remembering those things actually helps lead us to the place where we want to go. And so I think we wanted to, just as a little intro to ourselves, I'm an educator. I've been in public education in various capacities for about 18 years. And I've been a full-time teacher with Los Angeles Unified School District for 7 or 8 years now. And I teach at a campus called Sotomayor. which is a magnet school out in Glassell Park in Northeast LA. And I teach graphic design and art, but as I think you'll see a little bit more about us, we're kind of trying to, we're trying to see my subject and Reyes's subject is interconnected because they are, just because they are, yeah.
Yeah. And I also, well, I'm Reyes Flores, and I've also been in education in some capacity for about 20 years. Some of that time as a middle school history and English teacher, and a big portion of that time as a substitute teacher, which gave me a lot of insight into seeing students in different ways. And in some ways, you know, even though I wasn't with them for entire years, I would, you know, sub sometimes for months, as many, you know, sometimes a semester. But, you know, even that day-to-day subbing allowed me to see students more as themselves, as full people, not just as students that fall under a very narrow definition of success and failure, smart and dumb. And what Tina was saying about valuing everybody and what Teresa then echoed, that's kind of where we want to be, I think, in terms of how we approach education. I teach at Sotomayor as well, and I teach agriculture there. And we have a full running farm that tries to lean as sustainable as possible with livestock, a very young orchard, a working greenhouse, and vegetables. And then we have been working for maybe the past 4 or 5 years now with native plants. And oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Zoom is not my preferred means of communication. I'm a little burned on it too myself. So, and you know, kind of just rehabilitating the land and bringing it back to a form that, you know, it may have looked like if you can imagine a world, as Tina was saying. So that's just a little intro about me.
Yeah, and I think we wanted to, in the spirit of investigation and in the spirit of not being experts on a subject, but always continually learning and processing information and learning from each other, we wanted to throw a question out to you. And Joe and Teresa were kind of hitting on it a little bit, which is we wanted to ask you all a question of, do you think that the education system as it stands now, or as you experienced it, do you think that schooling as it stands now is oppressive? And if you think it is, then why would that be? Like, how did you experience it as oppressive? And I'm wondering, since we have about 13 people, you can feel free to type it in the chat, but I also like to, you know, it's really great to hear your voice if you're comfortable with sharing that. And I can type the question in the chat box too. So I see Tahira has written in the chat that it's mostly set up for failure, but there are too many boxes for children to have to fit themselves into. And I think that definitely speaks to my experience as a student and as a teacher. The teacher side, we're asked to fit into boxes ourselves, and then we're definitely asked to put students into boxes, like kind of like Reyes is saying, even a grading system, even if you think about how a grading system works, we can start to see our own students as either good students based on their academic performance, or bad, or I should say good people
Yeah.
or bad people based on their academic performance, which is really dehumanizing, dehumanizing and oppressive to a student and to the teacher who is asked to value a person's worth based on these arbitrary boxes. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. That's absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Romo and Reyes, if I may share. So do I think the education system in the US is oppressive? I think a lot of it was just focused more on like regurgitation and being told what information, what story, and what narratives you should follow. And for me, it was, I mean, obviously my dad was able to kind of take me to ceremonies growing up. And so having to live sort of like that double kind of consciousness, you know, going into school, knowing like what your teachers are teaching you, and then kind of coming home and experiencing like a whole different like reality. The school system didn't really acknowledge that. And you can see how it, as an institution, I work in social work, that still continues to replicate itself. And you know, if we look back to from education, where its history and its as an institution came from, you know, a lot of it was just to kind of like strip people of their language, of their native language, strip people of their native ceremonies, strip people of their understanding of their people's history. So, and then ultimately, you know, with the industrialization, kind of breed the next generation of laborers who will work the factories. And then now, you know, you can see Google is kind of bought in the education system. There's a lot of big people, big push to like teach kids how to use tablets and how to design and build computer systems, which is like the way the economy works, is going towards. So I feel like it's just mainly been a tool of like, again, regurgitation and then benefiting the economic structure.
Yeah, that's absolutely what we've seen too. Like on all those points, Joe, it's you know, like in Freirean theory, like in theory of education, based on a teacher and scholar named Paulo Freire he was out of Brazil. He talks about the banking model of education, which views where a teacher is trained to view students as empty vessels to be filled, and instead of coming with their own humanity and their own worlds. And that kind of goes to what David is saying about kind of like a curriculum that is not based in the world of students, that is based on the outside, right? All these things are, in our view, all these things are interconnected. Like the way the school system works is a product of its history, is a product of like boarding schools and Catholic schools and schools of indoctrination that we've experienced, where the goal was to strip us of our connections and of our knowledge, and to make us, the attempt was to make us believe more in their truth than in our own, and thereby displace us and weaken us. And we see the same tendencies in the school system today. And I think me and Reyes are interested in, the reason we ask this question is because the answers that come out of this, like, is the school system oppressive? Let us then like pivot into solutions.
Right.
Yeah, I don't, you have anything else, Reyes?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because within this space that we get the affirmative that it is, but just to mention that question posed is actually one that faces a lot of pushback. And I'm not talking about pushback just from, you know, conservative or people that are trying to, you know, protect the status quo. I think that largely, you know, Arturo and I, our parents both were active in the Chicano movement, and I think a lot of that movement's focus was on access. That was the big word. As long as we had access, right? Because we were locked out, and all people of color. And I think that that was a mistake to focus on that access, because if you look at the actual context, like what Joe was saying, and I think what is it David? I didn't see David. And to echo Arturo, you know, there's an idealized student that the education system is trying to create or make, and largely it's an upper middle class white student. And that's seen as the success. That's seen as if we can get a student to that level, if we can bump them into the middle class, they can get to college, that's seen as us being successful. We've actually done our job. But we don't see all the collateral damage, all the people that are left behind, that doesn't work for, that indoctrination is harmful to. Even the students that are succeeding, it's harmful for them. And so I have an interesting perspective, because I've gone through exactly standardization and standards, all of that. You know, I've gone through public education in Los Angeles. I've taught in public education in Los Angeles. I have kids who have also gone through the public education system, and they've gone to various schools, some very well-to-do students with lots of means, and some like the neighborhood barrio school. And just the place where the kids from the well-to-do areas start out, just being themselves, our kids in the schools that we teach have to work so hard just to get to that place of acceptance and indoctrination within the system. And that, I think, is extremely oppressive and damaging to me. But it's definitely refreshing. I'm trying not to go too long, but it's really refreshing hearing other people kind of agree, because I know that this is a very controversial statement. I think we're starting to wake up and recognize oppression more as a society, but education is seen as something that's, I think, largely good, and we shouldn't touch it. All we need to do is create access.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like where we're coming from, is like we're pushing back on that idea, and us and many other educators kind of pushing back on that idea that all we need to do is give more people a chance through the door of education to make it work. And we're seriously reconsidering that. You know, I think our position is that education itself has to change. It's the school that has to change rather than the people who enter the school. I saw Clement also made this point that describing education as too many white settler colonial teachers and admin in positions of leadership. And I think that, you know, what we found also is that, I mean, this is a really complex issue, but white settler culture and settler colonialism, part of decolonization, in my understanding of it and my lived experience, is that we, regardless of our position, we internalize the oppressor's ideas. And part of decolonization is to recognize that in ourselves. And so, you know, again, going back to a civil rights kind of framework, like a history of civil rights in education, like the idea would be that you need more brown, indigenous, and Black teachers in the classroom and admin and leadership positions, and then that would change because we come from a different experience. But LAUSD has a lot of teachers of color and a lot of teachers who come from a certain class position. And a lot of times we're not seeing that happens, that change happens automatically, you know. And so the oppressive system is like it's really resilient. And you know, you're kind of like getting to the pressure point when they start reacting, right? When they start not wanting to talk about certain questions. And I think the system is really resilient to change, regardless of who's in that position.
Mm-hmm. Very resilient to change. I mean, just, you know, to kind of put the point a little further, I think LUSD is probably the largest school district to have we actually have a plurality of Latinx teachers in our school district. So more Latinx teachers and instructors than white instructors even in our school district. Yet, I think the system is very resistant to changes, as Arturo just mentioned, maybe even more resistant within that structure, because now we can point to the success of having a very diverse staff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if the purpose of education is to indoctrinate and to strip people away from their agency, then it doesn't matter what color you are or what circumstances you came from, because if you went through that system and that system was successful in what it had set out to do, you become an educator who's colonized, and it works.
It works.
Yeah, is to perpetuate that.
And the system, you are actually, if you have become a success of that system, you've been rewarded by it. So then you echo it back. And all the students need to do is work as hard as you did, or, have ganas, right?
Have ganas.
Have ganas.
Yeah. Yeah, I had another thought, but I forgot it for now.
Are there any other thoughts on this question at all, or?
Yes, hi. I wanted to add that my main experience with public schooling is just a very like one size fits all education that they try to force, and kind of if you don't fit into that, like either you're just kind of like left behind, or they consider if you don't fit into that, they kind of even consider you like not like in a lesser level.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I know, like I personally experienced myself, and then I could see it even happening for my daughter already. And then even like last year, she was in 3rd grade, and I was very excited to see on the curriculum for that school year was they actually had it on the list was like Native American like history. And I had tried to talk to the teacher about like what exactly they were going to cover, but she didn't really tell me much. And then what it came down to was like one poster project, and that was it. And then even coming from community college, seeing the ethnic studies not having any people of color teaching it. So I know that was something that a lot of students took issue with, but also what other choice do you have if you want to take it there? So it makes choice, and when you don't fit into those categories, or if you want to do something different, it makes choices very limited on like what you can do.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think maybe the ethic that we're proposing, or that we're proposing as something to think about or build upon or consider, would be that a school system shouldn't have boxes that students walk into and fit into or not, like they either fit in or they're rejected from the system, but rather the school system should look at the students who arrive in the doors and then make boxes, help them co-create boxes where they fit, right? Like the community should influence the structure of the school and the curriculum of the school and the way that we teach. And I don't think it's a controversial statement to say, like, as a teacher or as a student, anybody who's been through schooling, that there are people who like succeed at it and then they're rewarded, and there are people who don't succeed at it. And what we're proposing is that maybe that shouldn't be actually the case. Maybe there should be like these failures and these successes. And yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I'm sorry for that, your experience, Rita, and your daughter's experience too. But it's kind of going back to the definition of what success is, of what smart is so narrow that it locks so many people out. And then the people who don't fit into those definitions internalize that, and it takes them really a lot of time to recover from that sort of trauma. And what I think it started maybe was subbing. I don't think, these have been ideas that Arturo and I have been bouncing back and forth for 20 years now, but from my experience in meeting so many students, all students want to be productive and happy and lead, successful lives, and but they're not many times given the opportunity. And if it's a certain subject that is, if we could talk just about the standards and just about what that sort of context of the standards, it's very, we push kids into college or career pathways. That kind of defines their value, how well they do there. And within the context of that, there are a lot of subjects that are either very specific, highly technical, or, for example, just to give you an example, jobs. So we now require our kids to get up to Algebra 2 to graduate. And the CSU system has just added another year of math to qualify for their system within the A through G. And when you actually look, if you're actually talking about jobs and you look at jobs that require Algebra 2 on the job, we're talking about 5% of jobs within the entire nation. But yet 100% of kids need to come out learning Algebra 2. And to me, that sort of thing doesn't make sense and continues to narrow the box of what is successful and what is smart, where there are so many different types of intelligence. But our kids just, by and large, do not get the chance to show those intelligences, and as a result, feel like failures and internalize that. So that is what the most oppressive part of it is to me, and the most damaging part, and what we'd like to get away from. And we actually have a few solutions, I think, that we've been thinking about.
Yeah, and I think what we wanted to do is propose that there are three main family groups or subsets of why school is oppressive. I think that you all see them, you covered them. If I could share my screen, is that possible, Teresa? Yes. And that's just so that people can also see what I'm saying. Like to Joe's point, this is basically reiterating what everyone has been sharing about their own experiences and ideas of education, like your traditional mainstream education, which is, yeah, education is thought of as this program that prepares young people to be workers, and to be workers in an exploitative system too, right? Like, you'll hear things at school like, maybe me and Reyes are advocating to give students a little more time in between their periods, a little more social time, a little more ease-in time. And maybe there'll be other teachers who say, no, like if you're late to your work, you're gonna get fired. And our response to that is like, what type of job? Like, that's such an exploitative job. Like why are we preparing them to be that type of worker where if you're 2 minutes late to your job, you're fired? Like that's the type of compliance that we're training them for. And that idea of like education as a workplace preparedness program is really like, it ties it to a capitalist system, and it ties it to a highly exploitative system that really reduces down the value that we assign to children and to humans. Are you a good worker? Are you a bad worker? Are you compliant? Or are you creative, right? All these things. There's all these like implications of treating education like a workforce training. The second thing that we see is that the way we educate is paternalistic. So we demean our students and we feel that they don't know anything before they enter the class. We treat students, sometimes we treat students like they're our workers and we're their bosses. So they have nothing to provide, and we provide all the information. And in turn, they see us as the authorities. And then the third thing is going back to our curriculum, the goals of our standard system and our grading system and our curriculum really denies the presence of student life and agency in their full humanity. And that goes in a bunch of multiple directions. Like, what does the curriculum look like? And does it even include student life and student history and student voice? Or is it, or are they learning a Eurocentric curriculum? One example that me and Reyes sometimes use with our students is that when I was in elementary school, we learned about the 4 seasons, and I grew up in LA. And so of course, when December came around, I cut out like 3 little circles, white construction paper, and I made a snowman. And then I got cotton balls and I glued them on. And I actually didn't see snow or actually touch snow until I was 18. And I thought it was gonna be a cotton ball. I was like jumping into the cotton balls. I thought it was gonna be all fluffy. And it was actually like really painful and wet. But that's not, so what that is it's like this imposed idea of seasons. And my lived experience, my knowing, my embodied knowledge and knowing of this place that I grew up in, that I was born in, was displaced. It was pushed out by an authority figure. A teacher told me, no, winter means snowmen, fall means leaves are falling, spring means the leaves are growing back. And it really didn't match with what I saw. I knew a whole different, I was really aware of a whole different series of seasonal patterns, days getting shorter and longer, the hills turning green and then turning kind of that dried tan color, a rainy season and a dry season. And those were my embodied knowledges that were then kind of like displaced, told that they were wrong. That's like, that is highly damaging.
Yeah.
And that happens on many different layers. That's a very, like, that's a really simple example.
Are there any questions or comments or anything at this point?
I wanted to add a comment to that just because I've been really reflecting on the fact that there are many cultures who have these very intricate, very complex, but very like grounded in terms of the relationship with the land calendars. I mean, you think about the Mayan calendar, and then you think about the Chinese culture, and so like the fact that we see cultures who have this very like well-rooted understanding with their environment to like now where you're just, I don't even know if you want to call it simplified, because it feels like it's even worse than that. But like, you got taught like the 4 seasons, and most people here, in our local communities, we don't even know who our local city council members and all that are. And like, I think that's why it's like education really wasn't this tool of empowering us to become leaders and become more responsible and more informed people in our communities. But, we were just being fed like, I don't know, this BS.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that one solution for kind of both of those things that Joe and Arturo are talking about is really kind of a place-based education, but on a really local level. The problem is that the curriculum tends to be made at the state level. And so there's already this kind of push to localize education to the state level. The problem is that you end up getting the Deep South states still teach that the reasoning for the Civil War from the Confederacy side was for states' rights, and teaching this really kind of this viewpoint about paternalistic slave holders that were very kind to their slaves and very gentle, and were actually benefiting enslaved people, and so that's the issue at the state level. However, if you take that education and make it even more localized in kind of a micro or hyper local way, and focus on this place-based education to start, then you kind of take care of a lot of those issues. You take the power away from the state house and you put it into local governance and school boards, which is not necessarily always the best idea, but what it can lead to is this idea of focusing on I think starting with the place that you are, and then moving out a little bit from there, but this hands-on education that's really anchored in the place that you're learning, and really for the people that you're educating, the students that you're educating. I don't know if you want to continue on that, Ms. Arturo.
Yeah, I think like electoral dynamics, like electoral politics is tricky, but I do know that we spend a lot of time in terms of United States politics thinking about like the presidency. And then our school board, like LAUSD school board, is probably a little more sensitive to pressure than, let's say, a state house or like an branch, national branch. And so I think what Reyes is saying is like taking local initiative. If curriculum was designed at a local level, then it could be more rooted in the land that the school is located on. And that's one of the things that we advocate for as a solution, is like a land-based or place-based education in public school. Like, I think another feature of this, like another feature of decolonization for us is like maybe trying to look at considering the labor and public-private dynamics. You know, I know that so in a neoliberal model, public schools are failing, and and of course, like we see them as oppressive systems, we know them to be. And then the solution in the neoliberal model is to create a privatized version, or a charter, or a private school, and try to have an independent school in that way. And where we're coming from as public school educators, as unionized workers and public school educators, is that the push for an alternative curriculum and a land-based curriculum also has to happen from within public school, not just breaking off from public school and drawing students away, because many of the students who attend public schools and don't have access to other types of schooling are there, right? They're going to be attending public school, and they're going to be going through this oppressive system. And so me and Reyes have spent our careers in public education for that reason, right? Because that's where our communities are, for the most part. So I think that it's not clean, right? Our proposals are not like free of complications and contradictions, but yeah, one of the things that we're proposing is a curricular model that is land-based, place-based, and local. And I think if I can, I was going to make a drawing, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude.
Because we want to make a drawing of a possible curricular map, like how we can make that.
While you set that up, I can talk just, you know, if you think of a social studies class, I had the same experience as Joe, as Rita, as Arturo, where, you know, fourth grade is the only time that we dealt with the Tongva at all. And I think when I was in school, we didn't even mention the Tongva. I think they just mentioned the Chumash, and we spent maybe a week doing a diorama, and we learned about acorns, and then we spent like the next 3 months making this really elaborate mission project, right? And I think one of the requirements in the rubric was we had to go to a mission, whether it was a local mission like San Gabriel or San Fernando. I think you got extra credit if you went further, which in itself is just so terrible in terms of, well, just the entire thing is terrible, but just in thinking that you get extra credit for having more access, for going further afoot to go to a mission, is just so classist. But par for the course, I guess. And yet, as Tina was saying, I mean, I think Arturo and I have sat down and done the math in years, and I think it's, what is it? Do you remember, Arturo? It's a 1 to 200 ratio of how long the Tongva have been here and how long the Spanish have been here.
Oh yeah, it's like,
yeah,
even that,
it's insane. And yet, how much of our history is focused on you know, post-colonialism here in California and the United States. And so but if you start with this place base, and what Arturo's going to show is that if you start, you can start where the history of the people in this place was. That's going to be your anchor. That's going to be your base, and everything else is going to be kind of relating to that. It's almost taking the curriculum and flipping it on its head.
And so you think about this as concentric rings. So the beginning, the center, the touchstone and center of the curriculum at any school under our model is the land that the school is on and the community of the school. So land and people of that land are the centerpiece. So not just like one paragraph out of a 300-page history book, or like one sentence that mentions Tongva people or Chumash people, and then that's it. You know, that's sickening. That's disgusting.
Yeah.
But instead, that the people of the land actually, original people of the lands actually become the center of the curriculum. That's the starting point. And then as we radiate out, maybe you can help me with this, Reyes, as we radiate out, we get other elements, right? So this might be like a model for designing a history class. So we have, you can talk in this, oops, sorry. You could talk in this model about, you know, like Latino, like in our case, in our school, what are we, Reyes, like 98%?
I think we're like 96%, yeah.
Latino culture, right? And you're trying to, and then you're tying the relationship of origins of Tongva people and then origins of Latino people, and you're seeing connections between indigenous culture, and then you could start talking about borders, whether borders are artificial, what did it look like before this border came about?
Right. You talk about displacement and diaspora even.
Mm-hmm. That might be like a,
so yeah, border policy, enclosures.
yep. Enclosure, capital, labor. Why did people leave? And then why did, it's not just people, we're not talking about abstractions, right? We're talking about like, why did your family leave Guerrero?
Right.
What were the circumstances under which your family left? What were the social dynamics that created movement? And then tying it back to a history of a fact that people were always moving across the continent. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a movement that's going back and forth between the center, sorry, I'm still practicing. It's going back between a center and the outside. It just keeps dialoguing back and forth like this.
Yeah, and this doesn't need to be necessarily like you're not going to necessarily start in kindergarten and cover all of this. It's going to be as the students get older and are able to understand certain concepts. But, you know, by the middle of elementary school, colonization can be introduced, and, you know, U.S. foreign policy, dating back to the Monroe Doctrine and the Truman Corollary, and, you know, the understanding of how that played into migratory patterns. So yeah, and
so under the model, just symbolically and actually, like, the center is the one that is the most important, and then the outside is peripheral. So like the U.S. enters really late in the game, right? But it's also influential in the movement of our people, right? And the student finds themselves right here in the middle. They don't find themselves like on the periphery on either on page 1 in the introduction mentioned once as an indigenous student, or on page like 399 when they're talking about immigration in the 80s or something.
Right.
Right. And then the whole middle of the book includes nothing about their history. And so what this allows, what we're hoping is that this allows students to study themselves.
Right.
Put
And
themselves.
exactly. Thank you. That's so beautiful, Arturo, the drawing. And just for a second, just to kind of get away from social studies, you could use this for science. And, you know, where you can start is the natural world that surrounds students. So you can actually start with the garden, with a western fence lizard or a red-tailed hawk, something that, you know, the seasons as they are here, right? We could talk about, you know, the rebirth in winter here, when the rains come and the hills turn green, and, you know, all the native plants that have been, you know, deciduous in the summer start to come back and blossom, and, you know, all the way to the dry season, you know. But again, it's place-based. It's taking the experience that the students have and the knowledge that they have coming in and putting that at the center, rather than them having to learn biology and then apply, oh, what is that fence lizard? Is that a reptile? What is it? You know, where does that fit into, you know, the food web? Instead of taking things from their life and trying to fit them in, you take their life and then you build out around it. So, you know, you can do that for math. I won't go into examples in you know, in literature. And so, yeah, just as an example of how these concentric circles work in education.
Yeah, and I think under science, you could start with ways of knowing, right? Like the first chapter in the science book is usually the scientific method. And whose scientific method is that? And and that science book never mentions other scientific methods, which are long-standing. I think, Joe, you introduced me to, is it Dr. Yellowbird?
Oh yeah, Michael Yellowbird.
Yeah, and he talks a lot about scientific understanding of native peoples, right? Uh, and and
What is the braiding sweetgrass?
that's Kimmerer. Yeah,
Yeah.
other forms of knowing and scientific knowledge, right? And the knowledge of the natural world that was rigorous, that is rigorous.
Mm-hmm. Traditional knowledge.
Yeah, it's somehow displaced off of here. It doesn't even appear in the curriculum.
No.
In the science, in this model, science starts with ways of knowing that might be like indigenous or traditional to the students who are at the school, right? And then the scientific method becomes like a way to look at it, but not the central way to look at the world. So maybe, I know, like the names of plants, like when I started learning the names of plants, I didn't learn their scientific names, which would be out here. But I learned their English names, like what are they called? Their informal names?
They're common names.
Their common names. I'm starting to learn their Tongva names, and it just
Mm-hmm.
feels right to call them by their name, as people have called them for generations, right? Rather than by their scientific Latin name,
Right.
which is cool too, right? It's cool too, but it doesn't have to be the central way that we understand our world.
Yeah, it is. It is cool, but it can become exclusive, very exclusive, and a way for a group to kind of take ownership of something and exclude others from participating.
Yeah, it becomes like this gateway. Like if you don't know the scientific names, then you're somehow not a good thinker. And what we're hoping here is like, you know, both of these examples are ways students enter right here. They study themselves and the place that they're in. And then they, with that bolstered knowledge of self, then they're able to fully enter into these other worlds without feeling like it's make or break, or I don't matter if I don't get this part. Because they've already got this part right here. They've already studied themselves and hopefully learn a lot about themselves, their history, their context, and are enlivened and strengthened to then enter these peripheral worlds.
Yeah, and hopefully they come out with their curiosity intact, their wonder intact. And I think there's that Carl Sagan quote about how every child is born a natural born scientist, but we kind of beat it out of them in the system. Like a few fall through the cracks, but for the most part, we kill their curiosity and their wonder about their world. So we're trying to kind of change that, I guess. Should we check? I'm not very good at checking the chat box, and I'm on a phone, so it's a little harder.
I can check. I think the same can be said for art, like certain types of expression, right? Like poetry or painting. Like how many students are, have that beaten out of them. Like they all start with these really, like children start with like really incredible senses of like synesthesia, like colors have sounds and scents have
Right.
colors. And then they're taught, no, that doesn't work. Like a color is a color and a scent is a scent. You're wrong. And then, we beat it out of them. By the time they get to me, they're like, I can't draw, mister. I can't write. I'm not creative. I'm not smart. And we routinely hear that.
Yeah, as 14-year-olds.
Yeah, and that's not their fault. They didn't come up with that themselves. Let's see, I'm reading the chat too. Well,
Can I make a comment?
yeah.
I wanted to say that one year I did just names from September to December. The kids, when they came and, you introduce yourselves, a new batch of kids come every September to the garden. And so, and they introduce themselves, who they are and why they came to the garden class and what do they like about the garden. Just very simple questions like that. But then for 4 months, we just talked about names, their own personal names. And it was so funny because most of my students also are mostly Hispanic. And most of them have biblical names. And I shouldn't say none of them, but I would say 95% of them, maybe more, didn't know those biblical figures. Maybe they went to church, but they didn't know anything about all these names. Who they came from, why they were there, why were they called this name. And they spent a lot of time, I kind of week after week, I had to go home and find out who named them and why they were named what they were named. And then we did this whole mapping thing because I was trying to actually teach them the names of plants and stuff. And it's so hard to remember all those scientific names, which I myself don't know because I don't have a science background. Or because maybe I'm not smart enough to remember those Latin names.
No, that's not.
I'm being facetious. But,
Okay.
but what I meant was that these kids then had to figure out why they were named a certain name. And if they had this name meant something. You have a responsibility to your own name. If you're called Jesus, then you better know about Jesus. Or Christ, we better know about Christ. And if you're going to try and be godlike, then man, you got a huge burden on your shoulders. And it's a lot to ask for a fifth grade kid or a sixth grade student, but to live your whole life not knowing why you were called Christ or John or Jacob or anything. One kid, his name was some actor's name he had, and he found out that his parents named him that name because they liked that actor. I forget that the actor's name. So then, place-based education is that what you're mentioning, making sense is that if you know where you are, you start with the name. Somebody's going to call you by your name, for God's sakes. And if you don't even know what your name is, where it comes from, then you don't know anything. You're kind of floating forever and ever. And what was really interesting that by the end of it, we'd made these maps where their names came from. And they often came, because they were all these Spanish names, they came from Spain, which came from its, ancient history, which were Jewish names, which were Muslim names, which were connected to the Middle East, which were connected to the whole other part of the world, which were connected to the Silk Road, which were connected to India and China. And you could go on forever till you realize that, my goodness, we are all connected.
Right.
And then, from the Bering Sea to wherever they were right there, and that was a garden class, by the way. So fortunately, I had nobody breathing down my throat to tell me, what are you doing here? This was to plant carrots and whatever else.
Exactly. And you'll never find that in a standard. You'll never find that in a curriculum.
No.
But what you did in terms of placing the student, and not only placing the student at the center of their own education, right? But valuing the student for who they are.
Oh, they are. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, is such an important thing. And then you can see, as you just described, all of the connections to the world that come from that.
Yeah.
Right. And they're starting to discover that.
Yeah.
You're nudging them.
Yeah.
But they're starting to discover that on their own. And that's education.
You know, they were bugging their parents, and the parents didn't know. They were bugging their grandparents. They were bugging. They were going on and on, asking these questions for months, till some of them didn't have an answer till December, till spring, Christmas break. And they said, Miss T, we don't have the answer. I don't have an answer yet, but I want to find it. It had become an obsession to find out why I was named this and what does my name mean, who gave it to me, and so on. So yeah, naming and something is very important.
Yeah. And it's so interesting the way that you bring up, like, no one's breathing down my neck. Because I think as educators, we definitely feel that pressure of, you're off curriculum, you're off the standards. Well, I'm teaching something that matters, right? And but we're constantly afraid of being of getting in trouble, and not only getting in trouble, reprimanded, written up, ultimately losing our position because of something that we're trying to do that's more liberating. Sorry, Mr. Roma, I think I cut you off.
No problem. I mean, it just like to lay it bare, the coercion that we feel to teach certain standards is kind of like the same thing as saying the standards don't include students. Like, there's nothing in standards that talk about an authentic connection with students. I mean, it might be in a handbook for best practices, but it's not actually included in what we're expected to teach and what we're evaluated on as teachers. It's not part of the logic of the school system. And you could say that it's sad, or you could say that, oh, that's too bad, but it's actually brutality. Like, that's a very violent act, that the system that you enter as a student does not include you at all. Like, there's just no regard for you. So if we were how do you say that? Automatons, and we robotically followed the teaching of the standards, it would be a very brutal and terrible system. But fortunately, we have some autonomy and we have some discretion in what we teach, especially if we're teaching like gardening, agriculture, arts, things like that. Like, those are some of the subjects that have the most freedom. Yeah, I think either somebody from Regenerative Collective had typed something about science, that Western scientific method is kind of focused on this reductionist logic. And he says other cultures don't hold this reductionist viewpoint, that in order to know something, you must be able to break it down to its subatomic particle, right? It goes into our logic of the workplace, right? Like, that's why Algebra 2 and Trig, it just gets more and more specialized,
right?
And atomized, literally atomized from other sources of life. And that's why you have people doing really destructive things, because they're focused on their one specialty and their one box, and they're not seeing how it relates to the social, or to people's lives. And yeah, it's a holistic system. So what we're asked to do is to atomize, and my friend Luis Trujillo has been using this term, which I really like, called dismember, right? It asks us to dismember ourselves, atomize ourselves, perform the scientific method on ourselves, and reduce ourselves down to not a human, but a teacher, like a module that delivers.
Right.
And we're asked to do the same for our students, to treat them as products to create. Like, I'm just going to add things to you until you're reasonably ready for the workforce.
Right. And yeah, a way of commodifying, right? Commodifying a human.
Yeah, and I really enjoy talking to Reyes about this, just because it relates to agriculture and the way that the logic of like big agriculture and how that works in terms of like this idea. Yeah,
like, for example, for big ag, a pig is not an organism. It's not a living thing on its own. It's a commodity that needs to make a certain weight within 9 months, and that's the most important thing. What's called an FCR, right? A feed conversion ratio. How much pork are you getting for the feed that you're putting in? Same with chickens. What's not important is what that pig needs to do to essentially be a pig and live in a way that it wants to. That has nothing to do with it. It has to do with how can you get the most product for the least input? How can you get the most output for the least input? So, yeah. And yeah, and I'm afraid that's kind of how we can see our students sometimes, It's it can be very transactional, I think, which is sad.
Yeah.
Let me look at I'm really bad at multitasking. I'm sorry, you guys.
Yeah, Zoom is like so, wow. So I'm dazzled by all the new things that I have to be like looking at all.
Yeah. So Rita is mentioning, can you read that one, Mr. Romo, real quick?
Sure. Rita says public school isn't set up to foster and encourage thinkers and innovators. It just teaches obedience or to obey.
Yeah. We've been talking about just even how our students, at our school, I'll just give you our example, right? They're not allowed to go to the restroom. We're not allowed to let them go to the restroom, except they get certain little passes. And now, what is it, 6 per semester? 6 per semester. And if you don't have a pass, you can't go. So even as Arturo and I were talking the other day, he was mentioning this is one of the most basic processes of the human body. And we are teaching them, no, they cannot, listen to their own bodies without us giving them explicit permission. And just think about that damage.
Yeah, and that is actually, I mean, there's a correlation between what type of student, what community they come from, what color their skin, what language they speak, their history. There's a correlation between that and how repressive and oppressive the system is in terms of like restricting of their bodies. Like students of color go to schools that are highly restrictive, like random searches, police presence, gated bars around the school. Up until recently, metal detectors, highly policed environments. I went to LA County High School for the Arts. We could go to the bathroom whenever we wanted.
Right.
And that's because that system, I got into that system through audition. And, I got to see and like what another model could be like. And I think there's a fear, like the system fears students of color, and even within our own school, the rationale for those passes probably, I imagine, would be, well, kids don't know what's best for themselves. Like they're just going to go fool around.
Right.
And so I don't trust them when they say they have to go to the bathroom. They probably are going to go talk to their friends. And what a horrible thing for them to go talk to their friends, right? Like that's what a crime.
Yeah.
They want to go talk to their friends.
And yeah, and I went to a gifted magnet, and so we were all the good kids, right? So we were, teacher would tell us at the beginning, hey, there's a pass. When you feel like you need to go to the restroom, don't make any sound, don't interrupt me, pick up the pass and you can go. And so that was, less, I guess, restrictive than what we have. But now my daughter now, she went to public school through 8th grade. She then got in on a scholarship to a progressive private school in Pasadena. It's a totally open campus. They can get up out of their class anytime they want for any reason. They can go and visit a friend in another class. They can go and see a presentation from another teacher in another class. They can go to the restroom. They can go lay on the lawn for a while. And so we're, certain people are allotted certain privileges and certain people are not. And, as I think it's been floating around, a number of little memes and stuff, but the safest communities are not the highest police communities. The safest communities have the most resources. And so, It's definitely that sort of thing. Okay, sorry. I can read this one for you, Mr. Romo.
Oh, one more thing for Rita's comment. Fun fact is that the school that we work under is under this mini district in LAUSD called Local District Central. And Local District Central's motto, you can look it up on their website, is believe, behave, and become. That obedience is right in there, like behave yourself.
Yeah.
I actually can everyone hear me? I don't know if
Yes.
my volume is on. My name
I
is
can hear you.
Salita. I just wanted to share. I actually took an English class over the summer, and one of our assignments was just understanding the concept between education and capitalism. And one of the most like crazy things that I learned was the way that education, I completely forgot the author of this article, but it pretty much stated like how education is viewed as like an ATM system. It was called the banking system.
Mhm.
And it pretty much says like it sees education as like an ATM. So the depositor is the educator, and then the receiver, like the ATM, are the students. So like the educator is constantly like, you know, depositing like in a bank. So it was like just like the idea of like capitalism and how that is the key like to everything in the United States, like educational system, like, you know, just being like the depositor, and you know the ATM like doesn't give anything back. You just like deposit and deposit into that
Right.
system. And then it talked about like you know, just the way that y'all are saying that in education, like it really depends what class you're at, that it'll it's like the type of education that you receive. So the author of this article, like he sat into 4 different schools, and each school was in a different community based on like the class. So a more elite community, like a private school, and then a public school with like middle class workers, and then like the poor, the working poor. And then pretty much like what he observed was that in these elite schools, like the children get to choose like what projects they're gonna do. So for like the science fair, they get to choose like what their project will be on, and they get to like teach something. But in the working class schools, they're given a topic. Like you don't get to choose what you do. Like the teacher, because they're like the ones with the power, they're gonna tell you like what you have to present. And their projects were not like they were teaching something. It was more of like a poster with like a requirement of like 2 pictures, and then they get like 2 minutes to talk. And then the more elite schools, their projects were like they're giving like presentations to like groups of people, and they're graded on like the way that they talk to people, the way that they carry themselves. Like instead of like, oh, you just have to, you know, post 2 pictures and make sure it looks nice. Like they're really taught to like just graded on so much more. Like their expectations are like so much higher. And then you know, they mentioned that too, like in the more elite schools, like the kids, they don't have to get up and ask to go to the bathroom. They just get up and they go. Whereas like in the other schools, like they have to ask, and they have to like, if you go more than twice, like you have to somehow justify like, why are you going to the bathroom twice? And it's like, it was crazy. And then this article was written in like 1980. So I was like, oh my God, like that thing has changed. Like it's still that way. And also, like in these elite schools, what caught my attention was they have no alarms. Like they don't follow like when the bell rings, you go to your next class. But in like the working class schools, they're taught like that industrial mindset of like, oh, the bell is what tells you like, oh, it's time to go to lunch, it's time to go to math, it's time to go to this. Like,
Yeah.
so it's very much like an industrial way of like training these kids to like go about their work day or school day.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's in a
Thank you.
that's in a nutshell what we see and what we experienced when we went through schooling. But like when you look at those two poles, like the elite school and then the public school, I think there's a tendency, like maybe a temptation to say like, well, we got to make the public school more like the elite school, like give kids more freedom, give kids the same rigor, things like that. And I think what we're arguing is like, maybe there's a way to supersede the pole, right? Like we don't want to become them. We want to be more ourselves. Like we want to know ourselves. And I think what I would argue, and I think what me and Reyes are arguing is like doing that curricular map that has like the center of that where the land is, that where does that place an elite student? It doesn't place them right there where they usually are. It places them like right here. They have to learn
Right.
about others first and their relationship to others. And maybe in more advanced classes, they start to learn how their privilege and their wealth is actually gained through the exploitation of others.
Right.
Like really liberatory education for somebody in an elite position.
Right.
They used to be in the middle, like, and in those elite schools, they continue to be in the middle.
To be in the middle, and they'll be in the middle their entire lives, and they learn that they are the most important thing in the world. But that's harmful to them because they have the most resources, and they are not able to critique the system that put them there. And so, if you humanize a curriculum like we're talking about, it actually really does level the playing field to an extent, because even those with access and wealth don't have the ability to kind of draw on their own experience to gain advantage. And what you have that you're describing is those three, if you can think of three tiers. You have the schools that our students are in, that they're prescribed restriction, they're prescribed grit and rigor and standards, standardization, right? All of those things, they're prescribed because they need to stay in line. And the curriculum is similar to an elite public school in a well-to-do area, where you can argue that maybe the curriculum is still not student-centered, student-based, right? And it is displacing to students in that area, right? However, they have resources. Their parents can give them tutors. Their parents have generational education that they can draw on to help them through their journey. So they have this advantage. And then you have the example that you talked about, which is that kind of elite private school that's a more progressive model that is liberatory, right? But still places that student in the center. And so I guess, yeah, we're talking about a model that supersedes all of them, that really it's a humanizing way of looking at education, and allows students that usually come from oppressed backgrounds to draw upon their strengths, I think. Just like, there's been a lot of successful dual immersion programs in Spanish, where you have little upper middle class white kids now having to ask the Latinx students next to them, can you help me along with this? Can you draw upon the knowledge that you bring and help me out? And that sort of relationship really flips kind of the power dynamic in not only in education, but within our society, I think. And just one other thing on what you said at the beginning, I'm sorry who it was, Carlita. Just in terms of setting students up for, as a transactional basis for capitalism, even I would argue, I don't give homework. I don't believe in it. I think that students should go home. They should be with their families. They should help around the house. They should help cook. They should help watch their siblings play. They should be on video games if they want, or Instagram, whatever. They should be able to live their lives the way they'd like to at home. And what homework largely does is it teaches students from a very young age, your time is not your own. Even when you go home, you need to be working, and you're not getting compensated. And every teacher in here can tell you that's how we lead our lives, with loads of uncompensated time. So we don't even value our own labor, and right, our own resources that we're bringing into the system. And I, for one, am not willing to do that, and at the same time play into this system that's so oppressive anymore.
And those are changes that you will get pushback on as a teacher, because that's where rigor comes in. That's where these euphemisms for compliance and obedience come in. Like rigor is a big one, grit is another one. You know, like where the system tries to be progressive, and we'll say things like, well, you have to prepare students, raise their expectations, provide more rigor to students, but it's not a critical rigor. They're still not studying themselves. They're just doing more work,
right,
to learn how to conform to another system that excludes them. They're actually, we actually teach them to work harder and do better at denying themselves. And that's a serious problem. I think, I know that David had a question, but I think that we don't want to take up any more of the time.
Right.
We're at 8:30 now, so I wanted to thank you all for showing up for this. This is actually the first time we've presented these ideas in this type of form, and so we were a little nervous and wondering how this will land. So it's really beautiful to hear the interaction, encouragement, and people like sharing their ideas and their experiences. And we take all of that, all those experiences, and hear you and learn from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Keep in mind, folks, this is recorded too, so I know we're a little over time right now, but Teresa will be presenting her part. If you have to go, feel free. Again, all this will be recorded, so that's the beauty about the internet. It's the informational power. But thank you all for coming. So Teresa will be taking it over.
Sure. Hi. Let me try to get video going here. Hey. Thank you, Romo, and thank you, Reyes, for your presentations. I'm proud to have teachers in my teacher families doing such great work. And I think part of the work we can do as teachers in these schools that are don't have much access, that are where families are socially, economically disadvantaged, we can make that difference in the classroom and the people that we impact, the hundreds of students that we impact every year. And I'm very grateful when I was doing my teaching credential program that one of my professors said to me, he said, if you know the standards, you could teach anything and find the standard to match it. So I kind of pretty much like took that really to heart and really learned the standards, whatever I could, so that would give me the freedom and ability to teach what I needed to teach, and be able to say, hey, but this is persuasive, right? I teach English. I'm a high school English teacher at John F. Kennedy High School in the San Fernando Valley. I've been working for Los Angeles Unified School District since 2006, and been teaching in different areas, mostly in the Valley, Arleta High School, Vista Middle School. I started at Harrison Middle School, which was in East LA. So I'm very, very blessed that for the past few years, Athena Calderon, who's Tina Calderon's daughter, has been a guest speaker in my classroom. So it's very important to me because when I teach English and narratives and stories, to have the narratives of the indigenous people of the land. And Jessa really brings her songs and her stories, and it just is so transformational for my students to see her and to talk with her, and they love her, and to really have their paradigms that they've grew up with the Mission Project, and a lot of them didn't even know that indigenous people existed, and then they see Jessa, so it's really amazing. And looking forward to sharing Tina's poem with my students too. I also try to bring in literature from the Tongva people. So Gloria Aurelanis, she's a Tongva Elder. She writes poetry, so I share her poems. I also share the work of Annie Mendoza. She did a documentary called The Aqueduct Between Us, about the water, the narratives, oral history of the people in Payuhunadu, the Paiute, the Numu, and the Newe, and the connection to the Tongva people here in LA. And so it's amazing to have that documentary presented to my students, and to have Annie speak to my students about those stories of the people here. And I teach right now 11th grade American English, American literature and composition. And I start the school year with this book, which is Bad Indians by Deborah Miranda. So it's Native American literature, and it's very place-based because it's about the mission systems here. Our family went through a mission system here, and the kids are really blown away. And since I teach in the Valley, it's near the San Fernando Mission, and they said they could never go back to that mission and see it in the same way again after reading this book and learning about the atrocities. And I was very blessed last summer to take part in the National Museum of the American Indians Native Knowledge 360 program. So week-long program in Washington, D.C. at the Museum of the Native American Museum. And it was a gathering of 30 teachers from all over the country, including Canada. And we were learning how to teach from these curriculums that were created by tribes all over the country, including Canada. And they're working on bringing the California tribes' voices into the curriculum as well. I'm going to share the screen right now. Okay, so this is a great resource. I think if you teach history especially, but you can incorporate it into science and English. I bring it into English too, because we're also required to teach historical background of the literature that we're teaching, and especially with the composition part of American literature, I have to teach the US documents, like the US Constitution, Benjamin Franklin, etc. So then I will start with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and there's a great resource here. If you look at this website, you'll see, I'm just going to go briefly through like a few things on this website, but I really encourage you to explore it at your own time, and there'll be a lot to explore. So when you click on lessons, so again, these these lessons were created by the tribes, and it's to encourage different perspectives and also for people to learn about the diversity of nations. So you can go subject, language, nation, region, grade, format. There are also standards that are attached to these. So you can see the different lessons that are available, and all this is online. So that's one really wonderful thing. I'm going to show you this one. American Indian removal, what does it mean to remove a people? So when you click on it, you'll see the grades, the nations, subjects, regions, central understandings, standards. You can click on those. And then you click on this. We won't watch it, but they have an awesome introductory video. So the first part, you'll see an introduction video, and video is great. So you hear teacher instructions, student instructions, and there are also, when you click on educator resources, there are handouts, and it's very project-based and student initiated. So opposing perspectives, remove a map, historians' perspectives. You can click on that, and great resources. But I'm going to go down, and you can see there's so many different parts of this. This is the Muskogee Nation's experience for removal. When you click on this, you'll have different lessons. But I'm going to scroll down. Cherokee Nation, and there's this one. I really love this one because I love all of them, but this is great because it tells 6 different Native nations stories of removal. So you click on that. And I'm just going to show you one example, the Potawatomi Nation, Potawatomi Nation, and show you what that looks like. This is great for research. So there's this, and the way this works is you actually the students can like see the story like in this way. So you'll go through the story like this and kind of get an overview of what happened to the Potawatomi people, and how their removal story. And then you click on case study. So when you click on case study, this is standard for all the case studies. There's a treaty, there's a map, there's an image, there's a document, there's a quote, and there's an object. So when you look at this, you can actually click on it and see the original treaty as it was written. And then if you can't read that, you can see it in printed English, so you can read the actual treaty. And when you click on the map and then you enlarge it, you can see where they were relocated. Removal became known as the Trail of Death to the Potawatomi Nation. It was a forced march in which people were forced to go somewhere new, even though they didn't want to go. And there's some questions that go with this. The image will show you an actual drawing in someone's journal that was actually there of the scene of the removal. So they can analyze this picture and see what was happening. These people watching, and the Potawatomi people here being forced to march. They can answer these questions, and you can see the full transcript of the removal. And you have different perspectives in the quotes. So you have quotes by the settlers, and you have quotes by tribal chiefs and other people from the tribes. So you click on this document, and you can see original journal entries, and you can look at the questions. Also, you can see the full transcript of the journal entry. And it can tell you what happened. Left behind 13 persons, 3 of whom were sick, and proceeded on our march. The day was exceedingly sultry and the roads choked up with dust. A child died on the evening of this day. A child died this morning. A child 3 years old died and was buried. The chief Wigwisa came in with his family, himself sick. And this is great primary source material. I think we're on the quote now. Okay, so this quote is by leader of the Potawatomi Nation. So you click on it and you can see a quote by the leader of the Potawatomi Nation and what he said. And what he said was pretty much, I have not sold my lands, I will not sell them. I have not signed any treaty and will not sign any. I'm not going to leave my lands. So these were his exact words. And then the object, this is really interesting, especially for people who love plants and medicine, because this is actually an object from the Potawatomi tribe. It's a prescription stick. So this is a prescription for its medicine. So all of these marks on the stick represent plants, and all of them together it's a prescription. So we can talk about the impact of removal. If they're removed from their lands and they no longer have access to these plants, what will happen to the people? I'm gonna just go back to the home page. So in lessons and resources, I know I'm going kind of fast. If you have any questions, please feel free to click on or type it in the chat. And feel free to message me later if you want more details. And there are some digital lessons that are very interactive. Like you could see how the salmon or the fish like travels in its journey, and a lot of Pacific Northwest history. The fish wars is very, very interesting. So northern tribes. And there's more. If you click on view more resources, you'll see a lot more lessons. Some American Indian perspectives on Thanksgiving, Maya, and this is something that I use to teach my students. And I'm really grateful that all these resources are free and accessible, and especially they're online. So it's really great. Oh yeah, and you can see the grade levels too. So this was created by the Haudenosaunee people, and it's a guide for educators. And this is really awesome. So it talks about the Confederacy, the tribes in the Confederacy, what it means, and the peacemaker story, which is, yeah, about the arrows and the eagle and why they wanted to unite the nations to make them stronger, and how our Constitution was actually based and didn't do a good job, but it was based on the Great Law of Peace, because the Haudenosaunee Confederacy was matriarchal and was governed by a grand council of clan mothers. It's really, really interesting if you read through all this. And I will teach this to my students so they know where the US Constitution comes from. And in my classroom, actually, I have a flag, the Haudenosaunee flag, and my students will ask me, what is this? And so I tell them why we have it and what it's about. And also, I I put my chairs for the first time in my classroom in a circle. And my students, at first, it was very strange for a lot of them because they're used to sitting in rows and they're not used to sitting in a circle and facing each other. So just having that physical change and trying to encourage conversation, discussion, and a sharing of knowledge versus like, you're learning from me, I'm the authority. And I tell them, you know, we learn from each other. And so it's hard for some of them at first because as we talked about before, the colonization and conditioning, so they're not used to that kind of space and freedom. They're used to this like teach and obey sort of setting. So it's strange to a lot of them at first, but then they learn that, and I think they really like it later. Are there any questions or comments or anything before I keep going? So I'm really glad that there are parents here as well, because we all work together. And like we had discussed before, sometimes it can be very different for students when we teach in this way. So I've had students like ask like, why are we learning this? And then I have to explain and let them know how this is how we live on indigenous land. And it's important, especially for if we're learning literature, that we're reading literature from the indigenous people of the land, that we're hearing their stories, and that we're teaching the real history as much as possible. And I also teach Frederick Douglass and about institutional racism. And I plan to start the school year with my 12th graders with the new Jim Crow. And I'm really glad I found a PDF online, because, you know, I think we can do a lot as teachers, even though our schools may not have like that much access to resources. But what we can do in the classroom and to kind of counter that despotism that's imposed. I've had at my old school, I've had a principal get mad at me because she walked in during advisory and not all of my students were standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. And she was going to send them all to the detention room where there aren't any chairs for future mornings, so that they would have to stand and have no choice but to stand. But at my current school, there's not that issue, and I do give my students a choice, and yeah, most of them, they understand, and yeah.
I wanted to kind of highlight too, if you're all looking at the screen here, you know, this is a really good resource that was put together recently. And, you know, I feel like, you know, as a person of color and, you know, as Indigenous people too, you have to, not that we need it, but we always constantly in this battle of trying to legitimize your stories, legitimize your experiences. And in ways where, you know, are we appealing to logic? Are we appealing to emotion? You know, how are we getting our voices heard? And just looking at this on the screen, how they're paralleling the Haudenosaunee Grand Council in Clan Mothers and the U.S. government. So this is the reality of how we're seeing how our constitution, how the government system's structured. And right here you have a resource to point out, like, look at the comparisons, like who got their ideas from what, you know. Earlier Teresa brought in talked a little bit about the arrows, and you know, you see in our I think in some of the US logos of an eagle carrying an arrow, and they kind of took that narrative from, and that symbology, they took it from the Haudenosaunee people. So just bringing that to light, where this is not necessarily like it's just about telling the truth. And so I feel like, you know, in this whole process of decolonizing education and decolonizing how we learn too, right, bringing in circles and all that, is that it's really based on, like, you know, the understanding of our stories, and, you know, essentially the enlightenment of truth. So just wanted to comment on this.
Yeah, there's a graphic that I really want to share too. Let me just send it to my email right now, that I got from an indigenous elder in Canada, and they actually have a law there that they have to teach indigenous education at all grade levels in all subject matters. That was like part of their treaty. And I think in Montana, that's like part of the treaty there too, or part of it's law. They have to do that. They have to teach indigenous history and narratives in all grade levels in all subject matters. I really wish they had that here in California as well. But I'm going to show you right now. Oh, I just emailed it to our. I just emailed it. You should have it right now. Yeah. Maybe.
We're just pulling it up right now.
Yeah.
Any questions? Any comments?
And I really would love to keep connecting with y'all. I think, like, as educators, that's like really important, and how we can bring the voices of the Tongva people, if you're teaching on Tongva territory, into the curriculum. And especially now with these new resources, like the documentary, The Aqueduct Between Us, is on YouTube, and it's free and it's accessible. So this chart, I teach this chart to my students, and I have them think in this way as much as possible, to think about when we're learning whatever we're learning, to think, okay, how has colonization impacted? If for example the land was taken away, what happens to people if we don't have elders, or if a language is taken away, or if culture? Why is this important? Why is this circle important? And I know there are indigenous people all over Turtle Island that use a similar circle. And what does it mean, all these things: respect, relationships, relevance, responsibility, reciprocity, reconciliation, resilience? Why are those things important? So I have this poster in my classroom, and I have the students really think about this, because it's really different. Usually in Western culture, we don't think, students aren't asked to think in these ways, how all of these things are connected. And I think when they start seeing how all these things are connected, they can see how things like sense of belonging is important. And this is what makes people and living life together in a way that is balanced. And the 7 generations too, that's something important to think about first, and to think about the future. And I think this chart could be used across curriculum in different subject matters, history, science, how whatever we're teaching impacts the students and the community and the natural world. Any questions, or does anyone want to see, explore, or inquire about the Native Knowledge 360 website or anything?
Teresa, this is Galita. So I think you mentioned, you know, like the importance of even parents like being present in this conversation. So I just like to share, like, even in like now, like the times of like virtual learning, a lot of the like, I don't know if you remember the field trip that you shared with me. You shared like 2 field trips that you had done with your class about the animals of like the native land here in California, and like doing those with my daughter, and having to like having or being able to like do more of like her education here at home now. Like I do feel like it is really important to like even have that as a parent. Like it's so empowering, like to know, like homeschooling, it was always something that I was like, oh, you know, I wish I could do that. But then you have the idea, I think, like even in our own education, like I always had this idea, like I can't teach my kid because I'm not a teacher. Like I can't, you know, I can't do homeschooling because I'm a nurse. Like I'm not a teacher. But now, like even seeing like how many resources there are, and like how a lot of like what our children learn too is like from us, and like from our own culture, from the land that we live in, and like knowing that even like learning that myself to be able to teach it to her, like it just kind of showed me like how possible it is. And now that, so her school's not opening in the fall, like they're going to do virtual too. So it's really cool to like have all these resources, and like even, you know, learning about the circle, and doing like that, you know, using that as like the center of like how we're gonna do school here at home. It's so important, and like has done so much even for us as a family. Like again, kind of shifting the narrative of like, oh, we're not actually like teaching you, and like we're not your teachers now, we all learn from each other. And having that here at home, like it's really amazing. Like I think that these resources even like go so much more beyond like knowledge, you know, like so I think it's like so useful even that you guys did this now, like in this time, because I think a lot of us are doing a lot of virtual teaching right now with our kids.
That's so awesome. I'm really glad to hear from you and your input as a parent. I think it would be great to hear more input from parents right now. What helps you, what works, and how we can support you all, because especially virtually, it's hard to make these have these conversations and connections and support, and I know how important it is that we all work together and support each other right now. And I'm glad, and I'll be happy to share as many resources as I can with you and with any parents. David had a question about any, since you've been in education since 2006 until today, have you felt her testimony about the impacts of your way of teaching? For example, do you continue conversations with your previous students and hear from them how they've benefited from your learning practices? I have, and I really connect with like what you and Romo were talking about, building relationships with my students, having that trust. And I did this like domestic violence advocate training, and one of the most important aspects of a relationship is trust. And so if I can't trust my students, if they can't trust me, then we don't even have a relationship to begin with. So so I do have these really hard conversations with my students about colonialism, institutionalized racism, and I hear them and I listen to them and their personal stories, and also they're treating them as human beings. Like, my students get to use the restroom whenever they need to use the restroom. And, a few students, if I know they're just messing around, because I know them, and I'll like tell them, I'm honest with them. I'll like tell them, I know you're not going to use the restroom. You don't need to go right now, wait. And they'll be like, okay, or like, and I'm grateful that I've had students tell me the impact of teaching like Bad Indians, having Jessa come speak, and reading poetry by Tongva Elder. And not only did they read the poem, they wrote a letter to her. So they wrote a letter to her that I shared to her. And then she had a response for my students. Like, so this poem was on burials and developments on ancestral burials. So it was like really, really impactful. And I think it makes them think in a different way. And I've had students tell me that, like, when I read their essays in response to Bad Indians, it was like, wow, I've been lied to my whole life. Literally, some of their essays like start that way, and that they're so grateful to finally know the truth of the mission systems and the land that they live on, and what happened to the indigenous people of the land. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I can speak to that too, Teresa, if that's okay.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I think part of the way that teaching is oppressive is that it isolates us from our students by placing us in these roles. So a lot of, I really, how can I say this? I think it's interesting that, it's curious to me that teachers will, if they're choosing a home to live in, they will live outside of the community that they teach in, if they have a choice. Like, that's a common thing, like, oh, I'm not gonna live in if I have a choice, I'm not gonna live in the community that I teach in. And I think that there's kind of like this idea that you're not supposed to form community with your students. It goes back to like what Carlita is saying in the banking ATM model of education. We're there as professionals to deposit information, and that's the limit of our interaction with students. It's very transactional. But like Teresa is saying, like, you can't have decolonial education or really difficult conversations without love. You have to love your students. And one of the ways that you show love to them is by affirming their existence and by affirming who they are as people. And I have students who I organize with now, so I've been teaching long enough so that my students will graduate, go to college, come back, have their own adult lives, and then we'll reconnect. And they've expressed to me their that my teaching and Reyes's teaching has impacted their lives. But it doesn't end there. You know, we continue to co-learn, learn from each other, and those are really strong communal relationships that I value very much. And I think there's a lot of barriers put between students and teachers. But I think that if we base our relationships with students not in trust, like that trust that Teresa's talking about, and in transaction, then we're not going to have impact. Then the education isn't liberating or decolonizing. But if we do it with a sense of respect and trust, I've found that those relationships last and grow, and we continue to learn from each other and build community together. And I think that's really lacking in our society. And I think it's really important. It's an important component to collective action, that the people that you learn from are the people that you share community with, and that you never stop learning from each other.
Yeah, thank you, Romo. That's so important. And one of those things that really, I'm so glad you and to all the teachers that do take the time to build this trust and respect, mutual trust between students, because that's when really learning can occur and growth. And a project that I have my students do is this heritage project, where they have to interview people in their family to find out where exactly they were from and the languages spoken in that area. A lot of my students are from Mexico, South America, and they're even surprised to learn about the different indigenous languages spoken there. And but it was great when one of my students came back and he said, "Oh, I just learned that I have Mayan ancestry, and my mom was telling me about all this." And he was really proud, and it was really nice to see that just affirmation of their existence. And especially with all that's going on along the border, I've had students after Jessica came and she sang her song, "The border crossed us. We didn't cross the border crossed us." And my students were like, "Wow, you know, that's really powerful," and really glad because they keep thinking they don't belong here because of the narrative that they keep hearing. And I keep telling them, your ancestors are from Turtle Island. And they're like, "What?" And so it's really great when they start learning about themselves and yeah, and origins of the school system. Yeah, and Bad Indians have such a great impact.
The book also has projects, so if folks, you know, parents or educators out there who want to kind of move away from the fourth grade mission project, the book Bad Indians also proposes different projects that you can do instead. So it's called Post-Colonial Thought Experiments. So definitely, if you don't have that book, it's a real good book to have.
Mm-hmm. And maybe even if your child is being forced to do that project, maybe, I'm not sure what conversation you can have with your child's teacher, but maybe have a conversation with them and think of possible alternatives that they could do. Okay, me. I'm sorry, I didn't have the video on this whole time. So, So I'm really, really grateful for everyone. Thank you for spending your time this evening with us and sharing your thoughts, asking your questions, and please feel free to continue to be in contact with us. I know for me, you can be in touch with me through the Regenerative Collective IG. You can message us there. I don't know, Romo, if you want to share your contact information or not. Or
we had me and Reyes are part of program of study at Sotomayor called Social Ecology that covers a lot of these issues about, and structure. It is moving towards a structure that we were proposing today. And we started an Instagram page that just outlines kind of a few slides on our thoughts, similar to what we shared today, and provide some resources. And if we haven't put anything on it yet, but I can send it to Regenerative Collective if they can kind of like repost us or share our post or something. Yeah.
okay, yeah, that would be great. Yes, please support Indigenous voices, especially the voices of the Indigenous people of the land on which you live. The literature, find out, you know, if there's literature by the people of the land that you live on and you teach literature or whatever subject, try to incorporate the narratives, the stories, and bring awareness. There's if you live on Tongva territory, we're lucky. We have like Jessa's songs are on YouTube. You can share them. Thank you to Tina for her poem. And there's another Tongva, there's a comic book artist. Her name's Wishoya. She actually did this shirt that I'm wearing. But she's doing this book on Torperina, and looking forward to its release. I was able to do a GoFundMe and raise a class set, so really excited about that. And the Aqueduct Between Us, there's Kelly Mejia. She writes poetry as well, and she is also a singer-songwriter, so lots of Indigenous voices you can share. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to thank everyone again. We're about closing time. So thank you again to Tina for being here with us. Thank you, Arturo, and Riz not here, but thank you to him as well for sharing. It was such a great conversation, and it really warms my heart and makes me, you know, happy to hear you and Reyes speak on the really important work that you all are doing. And thank you to Carlita and to Davey, Tahare.
I know, Tahari, you posted this. If you would want to give like a brief synopsis, a little bit about Green Schoolyards America. I know everyone right now, we're going to go back to school, but we don't know what that looks like. So if you've shared this information with us before, would you like to just briefly explain it right before we go? I don't know. Is she still here?
She's on mute.
Oh, okay. There. Let me unmute you. All right.
Hang on a second.
All right. There you go.
And there I go. So it's these 4 organizations based out of San Francisco that have come together and have been working on how do we bring kids back safely to school again. And the whole push is to bring them outdoors and use the outdoor space as a classroom. And then slowly change this mindset of not just considering an indoor space a classroom, but in any outdoor space a classroom. And so it's open to anyone who is interested in this conversation. And I've been on this since June with them. There are 11 working groups, and you'll see that, and each working group is focusing on something or the other. But the very first one, which is plans to ensure equity, has very few people on it. There's just barely any conversation of equity. And they know it because that's the glaring, blind spot and the omission, or not the omission necessarily, but no one's there. And so I keep saying this to whoever is an educator and whoever's interested in education in any way. Why don't you join this conversation? Even though it's almost coming to an end, because by the first week of September, they plan to publish a book free to the world to read on their website, on the Green Schoolyard's website, that will talk about infrastructure and park school collaborations and all of these 10 things that they're going to talk about, small briefs. But if your voices as people who are indigenous people and are people of color and are from marginalized communities, there are hardly any voices. And I don't know why that is, but really 95% of the people on this forum are white folks who are primarily women. There are hardly any men here, actually. There's a handful of men, literally a handful. And there's at least 1,000 people speaking from across the country, some from South America, some from Canada, a lady from Egypt even. But I've reached out to all my Pakistani educator friends in Pakistan, but nobody has jumped in. And I have reached out to my fellow rangers who are people of color. They haven't jumped in. And I'm just constantly asking, please come, and please talk, and please say all of these things that you've been saying tonight, such important conversations and voices that need to be heard, particularly when they're talking about how do you address the issues of a marginalized community in a garden? What does a garden education need to be doing to be inclusive? And certainly we can all say a lot about that. So it's still not late, it's still not over. I think this conversation of refining these documents is going to go on for a long, long time, because school is not going to look like school has looked all these years. And this is our opportunity, this is our time in history to actually change the dynamics of how we were educated, but also how our children are being educated, and how, as you mentioned, we need to bring the children's voices up and start teaching from the ground up instead of from the top down, as we've been doing for centuries. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing this. Maybe at another conversation we can see about how do we start our own project like this. I definitely was part of a project on how to teach kids through club curriculums to get more of an interconnected philosophy towards the land. And I think that's a big relationship thing that we got to build, is how do we connect people back to the land and developing a healthy relationship in general. All right, well, thank you everyone again. I'll be excited. I don't know what's going to happen next week. We'll see. And good luck to all the educators out there. Many blessings to you and everyone here. It's been a weird time right now. If you're in Southern California, try to stay cool. We're going to have a heat wave right now until Monday, as far as what we've been told. But other than that, I hope you all have a good night. It's been great spending time here with y'all.
And thank you, Arturo and Reyes.
Thank you all.
All right. Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you. Thanks, Rita.